Coming up, as we have piloted all off season long the many positive paths forward for the Brooklyn Nets heading into this upcoming season, this week we're going a different way. The worry week of what could be if certain benchmarks aren't hit. And key among them, maybe the most important, is the performance of Mikal Bridges and what could happen if he does not meet high expectations. We dive in, coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends. It is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie. He's the owner-operator of DFSR for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Arbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast and your New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We're free on all those great platforms. And let you know today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA or enter promo code LockedOnNBA for a free white tech hat with any purchase. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. And the other promise, Doug, as we get into this episode that we've been making all off season, is that the future is bright for the Brooklyn Nets. The future is strong with Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson and the return of Ben Simmons and all these great factors and the draft picks. But what if, Doug? What if Mikal Bridges does not take that next leap forward for Brooklyn? How could that really start to upset the apple cart for this team in the short and long term?
Yeah, look, this is why we're calling it worst case week. We're going to go through a bunch of these different scenarios. We're going to talk about, just some things. I think we've been overwhelmingly positive about the Nets this whole offseason. I don't think this is even going to trend so far negative, but just trying to be a little bit realistic around, making sure we're actually seeing this from all true angles. Right? Sometimes when you're really deep into something, you can only see it from your microscopic view, and that's really hard. And I think with Bridges, he's a really good place to start because on the one hand, it's easy to be overwhelmingly positive about him, right? Like the huge leap he took after the trade, just the crazy efficiency, how he looked like he could sort of be like number one scoring guy on a team, sort of a little bit out of nowhere after coming from Phoenix. And then, the hype train starts rightfully rolling on him. But I do think that this is there should be a little brake pumping here around expectations. First is just how many games is he going to play? The guy's basically played every game of his career so far, played 83 last year just because of the trade, right? So played one extra than most other guys are ever even given the thing. And I really want to just say to fans, that should not be the expectation for Mikal Bridges going forward. That should not be that he's going to play every single game of every year because nobody does that. And it's been an incredible run so far, but past health does not always predict future health.
Yeah.
And do you think that's a legit concern? Because I've seen a lot of people out there. It's like, oh, they got Mikal Bridges. He plays every game. I'm like, that's not. You can't project him to play every game. It would be insane. Because it's just not going to happen.
There's a lot of different things you could point to around this too. Now, again, I'm not comparing players one-to-one here, but the way that LeBron James was the Iron Man for so many years. Now, this is a guy who's played in deep playoff runs, and there's a cumulative effect there. But then all of a sudden, as he's gotten very much older, you're starting to see a little bit of that breakdown, right? And needing more time off. Mikal Bridges is far younger. Another good example is just going back and looking at Kevin Durant's time with the Brooklyn Nets. And remember, some fluky incidents that happened. Kyrie Irving coming down on guys just awkwardly. Messing up an ankle, missing a handful of games. James Harden, right? It doesn't have to be. I think sometimes, to your point, fans associate it as, well, he's a healthy guy, a physically fit, physically healthy guy that doesn't succumb to a lot of injuries, a lot of nagging injuries, hamstrings or otherwise, that players sometimes just typically you can see it, right? Especially coming out of college. This is just, what if he goes up for a rebound and lands awkwardly on a teammate or someone else and has to miss a couple weeks? That is not out of the realm of possibilities. And that's certainly something that when you go, well, that's never happened before, right? Nobody ever thinks about rolling their ankle until you're walking down your stairs one morning and you all of a sudden roll your ankle. And that's probably, if that were to happen, I think you correctly list this as being maybe the number one concern, because we'll talk about performance-based concerns, which I think are far less. This could happen anytime. Could happen game 2, could happen game 20. And if it were to, then we get into what's behind Mikal Bridges and the rest of this roster and where it's not going to be sustainable the way maybe once upon a time it was when you had a big three.
And look, no one here's obviously no one's rooting for injuries. We hate injuries. And of course with this, like we definitely don't want it to happen. It's more just like looking at the view of the NBA landscape and historically and just saying like, again, yeah, Mikal Bridges played every single game of his career. That's amazing. Like he doesn't succumb to rest as much as possible. Now we might see that sort of change with the Nets this year. This guy's become sometimes more important for teams. And as they get a little older, like there is a little bit more management around those minutes, especially if, you know, the season isn't totally on the line, like it isn't for the Nets, maybe not for the Nets this season. So that's one thing. And then two is that, you know, just because these things have happened, he's been incredible. The way to put it, sorry, I'm stumbling here, but the way to put it would be like, he's been incredibly healthy and resilient and lucky, right? Yeah. Because there's no other way to put it. Like it's a game where a lot of guys just get injured. You outlined a bunch of different ways it can happen every single game for players. And it just stands to reason that at some point that will happen for him as well. So the problem here with Bridges, unlike maybe some other guys, is that, and some other teams and definitely some other guys in the Nets, is that his importance for this team is sort of like overwhelming at this point. And I think that that's maybe almost underreported, because a lot of the talk around Bridges has been the massive leap that he made. And that's right. Like that should be the talking point about the massive leap, but and how much better he's gotten, how they really unlocked him, and how it's like it has softened the blow of trading Durant like so much. I mean, so much. It saved it kind of, not even kind of, it saved it completely. But the other like sneaky thing in the background is that he's so far and away their best player that to lose him at any point this season, even for some games, would really hurt. Like, I'm not even sure like Nets fans are totally prepared for something like that, because when you start, and we'll do this in a second, but when you start gaming out like what the team looks like after him, it's like he might be one of the most important guys in the whole league for a team because of the talent drop off after him.
Yeah, and because you have a lot of question marks, around the other guys that are on this roster as well, right? Players that we'll talk about later in this week, like a Ben Simmons, or even all the way down to someone like Cam Thomas, who we say, oh, he should deserve, he needs to take a bigger role on this team, but we don't know or can't quantify what they are. And then you can even look at other guys like a Spencer Dinwiddie, who we kind of do have a big sample size of what it means when he takes on a bigger role. It can mean more production for him, but it doesn't necessarily mean more team production. One note before we move on into the production for Mikal Bridges, the point standpoints here, is just a number that I'll actually, after the break, get into, which is how many games the average all-star misses in a given season across the NBA over the last few years. We'll break that number down and stats for Mikal coming up in a second.
First, going to tell you about our good friends over at Bird Dogs. If you're like me, you've been for a long time searching for a short that like fit just right. I kind of just would default to some of these kind of khaki shorts. They'd be sort of stiff, not that comfortable, but I'd be like, let's get the job done. Then Bird Dogs came into my life. Bird Dogs sent the package that basically changed how I completely feel and will continue to have felt and will feel about shorts going forward. These are the most comfortable and versatile shorts I've ever had. It's not even close. They get the stretch khaki, which makes them so you can basically take them anywhere. If you want to just go out for the evening, great, throw some Bird Dogs on. You want to go do some athletic stuff, throw the Bird Dogs on. They're good for everything. They give you the sculpted look. They fit really thin through the legs. And believe me, folks, that's good for the legs. As my wife has told me many times, that is the look that we are striving for, even though sometimes in the past I haven't defaulted it to it. Bird Dogs has solved this stuff. All you have to do right now, if you go on the Bird Dogs, you make an order. They're going to send you a white tech hat along with it. Got to go to birddogs.com/lockedon or enter promo code LOCKEDONNBA for that free white tech hat. That's birddogs.com/lockedonnba or promo code LOCKEDONNBA for a white free tech hat. Grab the shorts. Look, you're never going to just go take another pair of shorts after this. I'm wearing them right now. I can stand up on camera, but you know how that goes. We're not going to do it. Get them for yourself. birddogs.com/lockedonnba. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you.
Okay, so working our way through the worry week for the Brooklyn Nets potentially in this upcoming season and talking about the most important player on this roster, Mikal Bridges. We mentioned there, speaking about the Iron Man status for him and being so consistent and being able to show up and perform. One note here on the side is just that, remember too, he's played every game every year, but this past season after the trade was the first time that he was in this elevated role. And we talked about this going back to, not all minutes are created equal, right? Kevin Durant minutes are much bigger and much more important and critical. Yes. LeBron James minutes, right? All the All-Star names you think of. When they play, those minutes are much more high leverage than John Q off the bench that needs to fill in for 5 minutes here or there, right? And Mikal Bridges is now entering that territory. So that's a massive factor. I'm assuming you agree with that just before I touch on what will be an interesting stat these past few years.
It's actually a great point, and I hadn't even thought of it in this context, because I was more just thinking about just the realistic avenues of him playing all 82 games, which when you do projections like sort of for a living, no projection person would ever pencil him in there. But you are totally correct. And the idea that all minutes are created equally is also false. Like, it's not. And if you actually, a lot of times when you look at just sort of who is able to sustain some of the like minute stuff and games / minutes over the course of a year, role players can play more games because the impact on the game is not as high. When you were asked to basically be the team's offensive engine, and then two, a high-level defender as well, which he's going to be, also at the same time. That's an incredible tax on a player. Incredible. Like, most players can't sustain it. Like, we've seen, you mentioned LeBron before. LeBron made a career out of finding ways just to rest in odd moments. So because the level of taxation on his body was so high. You are correct. Mikal Bridges has never done an 82-game season with this role. And I think that's maybe even more than what we talked about first, the most critical part, and which is maybe a little scary too, to think about, like, hey, this is there's no going to be like a ramp up here. Like, you are going to have to be the guy for every single game. And I know him and Cameron Johnson are like best friends, and like the team really gets along well. I'll go back to what I said before. Go look at any other team and tell me another team outside of like Denver with Jokic, right? Or some of these other teams, like the totally elite guys who there's always going to be a drop off from. Go tell me like another team that is going to have as big of a drop off if they lose Bridges, a guy like Bridges off their team. Like, they just really don't have like a safe landing spot here if he weren't to play. Even like 10 games or something like that, which would be normal. Like, 72 games would be like a lot of games in a season. But yeah, I'm a little, that's it. The taxation level is something I hadn't really considered as much, but you're totally right. Now I'm even more worried.
This is what this week was for. And on top of which, too, just when you talk about those high leverage minutes, you mentioned about like LeBron there. I think, you said about finding odd spots to be able to get some rest for himself. You can also manufacture that inside of games, right? Being able to take off reps. And it's, in theory, not going to be nearly as possible for Mikal to do that as well, because of what he's expected to do offensively and defensively, and knowing, right, 26 points after the trade, coming over to Brooklyn in the back half of last season there, 27 games. You take away that much production, especially on the offensive end, and then what he means spacing wise and the attention to detail from the defense, all of those things. It isn't just we plug in player X. That's true. Like you said, if the Denver Nuggets lose the Joker, yeah, you're not just plugging in anyone to one-to-one replace, but a lot of other teams have viable options on the offensive end, have other ways to manufacture and get through the defensive end. The Nets are not high-end talent, the deepest team in the league. They're probably closer to the back end, right? Very dependent on the starting rotation. One other note that I want to make here when we talk about the absence potential here, there was just an injury. This came from over on True Hoops from Henry Abbott. I want to make sure I credit him.
Yeah,
this is going back to last summer. So this is following last year's season, and then before he went to the following one. Zion Williams, he was talking about him and all the injuries that he struggled with. But over the past 3 seasons, when he looked back, Henry Abbott, all the All-Stars, how many games they've played, 48 players in total, they averaged 28 games missed per season. Now, there's some blow-up guys in there. Kawhi Leonard's going to make that number look a lot larger. But the fact that you're zeroing in on 2 things, missed games, obviously, and All-Stars, because that's what Mikal Bridges needs to be, right? And if you take that into account, the sheer fact that Mikal's missed no games, even missing 10 games, like you said, right? That's a big factor. 15 games, 20 games. And the league average is saying that not only has Mikal been under, he's been absolutely annihilating it relative to where expectations should be. And that's certainly, at least for me, that exacerbates the potential for this to go off the rails in an instant were he to suffer an injury.
Yeah, it's again, like, this is why we're calling this worst case week. I know we're trending negative here. It's mostly just trying to balance out. Again, going back to the top here for a second. It's to balance out, I think, the overwhelming positivity we've had around this team going into this year based on some of like the nature of what's actually happened with them. And I think that we've had a lot of rose-colored glasses. Look, it's more fun to be like that. I get it. I want to be like that. I want to be really positive around the team. It's just a more fun rooting experience. It's a more fun analyst experience. No one wants to sit here and drag it all the way down. And again, this is all like super complimentary to Bridges, right? These are like all massive compliments. We're now talking about him in terms of importance even though he's not on the same level as those other guys, when it comes to importance to the team, he is, right? Like he is just that important. And, and guys like Abbott are like some of the best in the game, or when it comes to just kind of analyzing this stuff. But yeah, man, like this could get really, really scary. And here's another thing too. If you look at like post All-Star break numbers in terms of like his importance about like how good he was after the All-Star break, the usage, even just look at the usage numbers for this team. So Bridges was like 30% usage after the All-Star break. Second was somehow it was Cam Thomas, which makes sense, but those were like, it was super chunky in terms of like, he just took all his shots whenever like they needed him to do it during that time. And then it drops all the way down to like 22% to Dinwiddie. And then after that, it's like 20% Cam Johnson. And like these other guys in there just like aren't huge usage guys. I know the roster this year is going to be different. And there are going to be some other guys to take some shots, but not tons. It's not like they added great dudes in these respects, like high usage, energy, efficient scorers off the bench too. Like Dennis Smith Jr., Lonnie Walker, Darius Beasley. I mean, those aren't those guys. And so you start looking at, when we start looking at Nets minutes and we look at 240 and we do this all the time, if you back out 35 minutes a game for Bridges and redistribute those, it gets real ugly. Like, I don't know. There's no other way around it. It looks bad.
And we're going to talk about the potential value drop here in a second. So I'll close out this particular portion of the conversation by just zeroing in on what Mikal Bridges did in those 27 games, right? 26 points a night. The 3-point shooting stayed right on par with where he's been over the last couple of seasons. The shot volume went up, obviously, and the shot percentage, from the field overall stayed consistent. Everything stayed consistent for him, and that's what you wanted to see. Something that you can see potentially getting better is other categories like the assist numbers, the rebounding numbers, because we think with other players getting back into the fold or new additions they brought in. But that's the benchmark, right? Like, so if you talk about a worry, and just to couch this, like, I'm fully confident what Mikal Bridges can do for this team. But if we're talking about worry, what if he's a 24-point a night game? Like 24-point games a night. 24 points a night. You're
so worried about it, you can't say it. I get you. Sometimes
I didn't want to have to think about the idea that he'd only score as many points.
I'm super scared of things too. I stumble too because I can't get it out.
the guy that's not going to be a 30-point scorer. But just to that end of, we think about Mikal Bridges as the next leap. We think about 26 points a night. That's now the new floor for him. And in theory, maybe he has to be scoring 30 and 35 points in given games. Maybe he has to be hitting clutch shots. So coming up here in a second, if Mikal Bridges doesn't take another incremental step forward, doesn't cement himself as an all-star in the league, how does that impact the organization going forward in the long term? And we'll also touch on the last FIBA performance, which maybe gives a little silver lining. Okay, so obviously getting choked up there in the last segment, thinking about the idea of Mikal Bridges not living up to all the hype. And everything that we've seen from him indicates that he's going to be that guy. But the other side of this is just bird's eye view as an organization. Because we've talked about this offseason, and we talked about this with Howard Beck as well, saying, hey, what if the Nets in 2 years feel like it's time to blow this thing up, right? And they want to make sure they maximize value for Mikal Bridges, for Cameron Johnson. They have this young core that they're building with. Well, what if Mikal Bridges did regress slightly? What if the 3-point shooting took a dip, kind of the way Cameron Johnson did when he first came over, right? If the numbers don't look as good or better, well, then he does become at least a slightly less attractive asset for other teams that would look to add him. And that's not about right now. It's not about this season. But we talk about an off season or 2 off seasons from now, when Mikal Bridges is closer to 29 than to 26, and you're trying to recoup and just continue to rebuild forward. This would be the worry of all worries, is you get to a place where you're ready to move on from Mikal and go in a different direction after his great years of service, And teams go, yeah, I mean, 2 first-round picks? Not going to be those 4 first-round picks we wanted to offer you when you first made the trade for Kevin Durant.
Yeah, that one I'm not really willing to go all the way there on yet because I still
It's worry
think
week,
like
Doug. Dance with me.
well, it's one of those things where like your valuation becomes too high, and then you are seen as your maybe like as if you're a company, right? And your valuation goes sky high, and then you're only compared to that new valuation. We're like, well, we're still a good company. We're just not, a $2 billion, whatever company. Now we're
Right.
500 million. Now that can affect like future funding and stuff like that in a weird way, even though you're like, hey, we're still like doing pretty well here, but everyone got a little too high with the value. I don't think like we're all the way there yet on Bridges. One thing saving him here that would insulate him from that is that the contract is still so great. And I think that like he could even regress off the efficiency, and he probably will because the team isn't as good. That might not be that good. And if you're taking a bigger load, like the efficiency probably just will go down a little bit. That's to be expected sometimes with, bigger, longer sample sizes of having to do more. Right. So I think that he can withstand. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's you can go say it. Go ahead.
Because there was my one curiosity, and we'll probably touch on Cameron Johnson this week as well. But we talk about the way his volume is going to really, we think, increase here in this upcoming season relative to when he first came over. We see the playoff sample size as well. But Mikal Bridges, he took 5 more shots coming over, 18 a game, almost 19 a game. Where do you think that number does end up being here going into this season? Because that does, the usage rate, we talk about that. We expect to see more from Cameron Johnson as well. Maybe Ben Simmons coming back, but I feel maybe you say about the value not really tapering off for Mikal in the big picture. I probably don't see the efficiency tapering off unless you're forcing him into the 22 shots a night, 23 shots a night. We're just on volume and fatigue. You're probably going to get some of those ugly late shot clock or maybe more contested opportunities.
I mean, maybe, but I think the other thing to think about here too is I think the usage probably sticks in the same range. I think that probably here like this, I think it was like 29%. I said 30% usage, something like that. Maybe it's a tick lower. I'd be shocked if it went a lot higher. But by the way, 30% is just really high too. So like I don't think that we can project it higher. And maybe the efficiency stays. One thing to think about too is last year with the Nets, that kind of just like came like he was a new player to the rest of the league too, right? Like he was not a guy that other teams probably thought too much about game planning for because it was all pretty new. Like there wasn't enough games to do it in. And then all of a sudden we were kind of just at the end of the season. Now off season planning, looking ahead, scouting, like there's a book on him more as this kind of player. So I think you could see decreases in efficiency just from that standpoint. Like he's going to get star level treatment from the other teams in terms of, best defenders, shutting them down. Like I think the narrative there, again, this is all what comes with getting good, right? Like this is the stuff that all comes with getting really, really good is there's more attention on you. And that's going to be what happens. But I think like we could see more of that this season too, with like, hey, we shut this guy down, the whole team's it's over. Right. Well, like, and that's concerning too.
And that's it's interesting when you bring that up as well, because the other side of this is how the team is performing overall. Because again, go back to those 27 games. Now we said, or at least I know I felt personally, continuity, familiarity. There's a lot of things you could point to say that the record could actually have been a little bit better if this team had more time to gel, right? An off season, but they were a below 500 team. So even if you are opposing it now, we can give you, like you said, that elevated treatment. Hey, best defender, pick up the toughest assignment, take him off the court. The other side of that is, even when he was having really great performances, this is actually Mikal irrelevant. It's still weren't winning the games though, right? Like you still were losing more games than you were winning. So that becomes a factor here. But I do tend to agree with you, right?
You know what's funny about that?
Mikal Bridges.
What's funny about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, that's like the knock always on Cam Thomas too, right? If you think about what people say about Cam Thomas, it's like we're scoring all these points, but the team didn't win. Like they lost more than they won. It's like, well, you just kind of said the quiet part loud, right? Like because the other thing that happened was when Mikal took all that. Now I don't think this is his fault. This is more about the rest of the team. It's much more about and that might be the same thing with Cam Thomas. Like it's much more about the rest of the team also. Like he was always playing with those total B units when he was allowed to just take all the shots. But you astutely point out that when this other guy was given the ability to take a much bigger role, the team again lost more games than it won. Now there's cohesiveness issues and the team was all brand new together, and that's going to work in their favor this year that they will have played together a lot and like that, there's more time on task here. But yeah, like that's a great point. he got all the shots and the team lost more than they won. So that's
Right.
not exactly amazing either. Again, I don't think it's his fault, but it's not like he elevated them to win a lot more than they did either, even though I think he did everything he could. I'm walking a fine line with trying not to drag him here, like
No,
with this,
because
but
I want to get
good.
to this is the week of worries here, but also I think at the end of each one of these episodes, we're going to kind of clarify where we stand on them. But just to your point, wherever Mikal Bridges is at, wherever the supporting cast is at, Kevin Durant, right, was known for, hey, I'll go win a game with a bunch of rookies and second-year players when Kyrie Irving and James Harden are out. There are tiers to that level of player that can, saying will a team to win is a bit much, but they can go ahead and get you a bucket every single time down the court. And it does sort of become irrelevant to who else you're playing with, what the other team is doing. You end up just winning games because you get the ball in your hands and you dominate. The last note here before I do just want to conclude on how you and I feel. We'll all week long, we'll label our worry and then we'll say, where do we stand on this worry, right? How high does it rise for us? The Nets, Cameron Johnson and Mikal Bridges performed in their last FIBA tune-up game before the group stage will kick off on the 26th. And this was a game where Mikal Bridges late, as Germany gave them a bit of a scare, had a clutch bucket, really helped out. And also, this is a game where Anthony Edwards was the star, 34 points, leading the charge, being that type of guy. And this is at least in the worry category. We talked about him playing with better players, Mikal Bridges. Well, this is where you're playing with better players, but your role is to be maybe a clutch opportunity bucket, high-level defense, and being a part of the rest, not the guy leading. And that's just an interesting thing I think we'll watch throughout FIBA for sure.
Yeah, and I think we kind of knew that was going to be the case, like based on who the rest of the roster was, right? Like this is when when you're Anthony Edwards and you're an alpha, these guys looking even more like an alpha's alpha, right? Like, and that's a really good sign for him. But there's only so much room for guys like this, and this is a team full of stars. So I think that like I think I'm reading you correctly here, that like you're saying they're much more of like a role player. They're role players on this kind of team. Is that what you're saying?
That's what we're trying to bridge the gap of, right? Is this a high level, super extreme role player behind another superstar, or is he capable of being that guy 100%?
Yeah, I think like most people would think right now, if they I just know this. So like Seth Partnow just did his top 150 and guys like this, and where they tiered him, and he was a tier 3 player, I think, overall. And those are usually guys. It's like second best guy on a championship team. Like if you were paired with one of those other dudes, the tier 1 guys, like you have a championship level team, right? Like that's kind of what you need to have. So I think that's like where most people would put Bridges now. It's probably his ceiling, maybe a little higher, but like I'm not sure how much. Maybe that I'm underselling it, but I think so. I think we kind of always understood that. But for where the team is now, like that's just totally fine, right? But him being an elevated role player and more than this in the FIBA team, like he's playing crunch time, like he's one of their 5 best, like easily. So I think that he hit a huge shot in this game. I think that his understanding was already there, but I think we kind of knew that, right? I think before this even started, we're like, hey, this is kind of where he is. He's a guy that his skill set perfectly fits with any 5 guys. You can put him on any team in the NBA right now. He would be easily like one of their best starters. What he is, every single team needs. And if you can do a little bit more, then you're a superstar. Like, I mean, that's just what he is. But I think we already knew that even before. I don't think FIBA's telling us anything new there.
No, and that's why I think we can close out on this. That's why when we say in the week of worries and talking about Mikal Bridges, and we're going to do this all week, it's about everybody else, really, because Mikal Bridges can go to any team, can plug in anywhere, can be a high-level contributor. Now, when we think about leading this team and where we've talked about record-wise and playoffs and expectations, that really is team-associated. When I singularly focus in on Mikal Bridges, I have a really hard time for all the worries that we potentially laid out here. The injury concern is probably chief among them because you can't control that. That can come out of nowhere. Production-wise, leadership, role, two-way ability, right? All of those things, he checks these boxes, and I have almost zero concern that he's going to continue to be productive. For me, it comes down to health, and then also how productive and consistent are the guys around him to maybe afford him to maximize whatever his ceiling is going to be.
Yeah, for sure. So anyway, I think in the end, we come away with like being really actually in the end, super complimentary here of Bridges, and just the worry that the cliff that the team could fall off of if he misses any time, even for rest or whatever. Like it could be a situation where it's kind of, I don't know, we might have to squint to really see it. All right, worst case week, gonna roll on. We got a ton more to talk about, tons of ways that like this things to kind of just be on the lookout for this Nets team over the course of the week. We'll talk Simmons. We'll talk Cameron. Yeah, we'll talk Cameron Johnson. We're going to talk the wings. Like we're going to talk sort of like things that they have to basically happen before the end of the season, even no matter where the Nets are in the standings. Like there's things that the Nets really need to check off this season. We're going to cover it all this week. In the meantime, make sure you are subscribed over at Locked On Nets over on YouTube. We've been saying this for a while. Like, just get us to 6,000 followers. We've been creeping. I think we're like 5 away. Okay, just get over there. If you're not there, it's absolutely ridiculous. Like we say this a bunch of times. You have to subscribe to YouTube. I'm just like annoyed at you if you haven't subscribed.
Soft threats on friends and family are okay. We're gonna condone it up to a point, but let's get it done.
Yeah, like I say to my kid, like I'm just really disappointed. I still love you, but I'm disappointed. Like I don't love you any less, but like you can see the disappointment. So make sure you subscribe. With that in mind, make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube.
Or else, Iron Man. That's got a kind of catchy ring to it. I mean, it's not technically accurate, but it sounds evocative of the imagery. The truth is, I am Iron Man. Well, that's one Robert Downey Jr.
Oh, Bob, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball. Worry week. Basketball. Yeah.